We might be on
But-
introduction part 37. We don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
No, we can't do that. Bisexual lighting.
You're listening and you have thoughts and you want to share them with us. And we love that.
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot. Why don't you?
Susie sells seashells by the seashore.
No, she doesn't.
Because it's going to be great. And I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it. Well. If it isn't Christina
And Matt.
and Matt, you know what this is? This is Right Out Loud, the podcast where we talk about all kinds of things related to the art and craft of writing and storytelling. And today, it is exactly the combination or confluence or intersection of those two things that we're going to explore a little bit more and really get into depth about what is the key difference between writing and storytelling. So,
Yes.
first of all, how the heck are you?
I'm good. How the heck are you?
Ah, so good. So good. I thought you'd have a lot to say about this topic this week. So
Yes.
I really wanted to spend some time on it.
I am very opinionated about this.
And that's good. That's good. So yeah, I mean, right out the gate, the key question is, what is the key difference between writing and storytelling? What the heck is the difference between the two?
Well, I'm actually going to take you back to when I first realized that there's a difference between the two. I was invited to be a speaker at Seton Hill University, which at the time had one of the only, if not the only, master's program in fiction writing.
Mm-hmm.
So you could get your master's in fiction. And during the lunch, I was invited by one of the alumni, because she and I went to high school together. And we went out to lunch with a couple of her friends. And at the time, Twilight was all the rage. And so they decided to, as writers, as master's graduates, really wanted to analyze and pick it apart. And it occurred to me that they did not take into consideration the popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And with writers of a certain nature, shall we say, someone who has a degree or a master's degree in writing can sometimes take a highbrow approach to that sort of thing. But I've never been able to do that because that is where I found my love of reading.
Mm-hmm.
And where I still continue to find my love of reading is just in magical stories. I don't judge. I don't say this writer is better than that writer or so forth. There's differences. There are some who are better than others. But this is the moment that I realized that they didn't understand that there is a difference in storytelling and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And they could take all the classes on writing they wanted, but could they capture a storytelling voice? Stephanie Meyer captured a storytelling voice. She couldn't have sold the millions of copies of the Twilight Saga that she did.
Sure.
And the thing is that I also started out on that other side until there was a moment I was at Comic-Con in New York and the pay-per-view in the hotel room was Twilight. And my roommate was like, "Oh my God, you gotta watch it, you gotta watch it." And I'm like, "I don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch it." And the movie was equally horrific as it was, sucking me in.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm a reader and a storyteller connoisseur, I had to find out what was different in the book than the movie. What did I miss? Because there's always something that you miss in translation from book to movie.
Sure.
And so I went through and I became obsessed with them. And I think I bought like the first couple of the series while I was in New York and then continued to read them when I was at home. And I loved the books. Yes, sometimes overly dramatic, But if you actually look at the way she tells the story, I think you see that there's a bigger picture going on. And so at this lunch, as they were analyzing Twilight to the T, I sat back in my seat and I said, you know what, though? Not one of you would not want to make a living from your writing. You have a master's degree in fiction. You're already pursuing it, so you can't tell me different.
Mhm.
And I said, she's in Stephanie Meyer. She is laughing y'all to the bank. She's making the money that these writers want to make.
Sure.
She doesn't have to write any more books ever again if she doesn't want to. Or you could look at it even the opposite. She can write anything she wants to. She has given herself the freedom by writing these books and making that money to be able to write whatever she wants. Any publisher is going to pick her up. They're going to pay her millions of dollars, even if the next ones are flops. The thing is, the difference between storytelling and writing is storytelling tends to be the structure of what you do. So with Stephanie Meyer, it is actually in New Moon, those months that are just on blank pages, November, December, January, February, they convey an emotion, whereas just writing, she was a zombie until March or April months, or whatever it was the month. That doesn't convey the emotion that the blank page does.
Right.
And yes, I'm certain that anybody could come on this podcast and make the argument, well, that's writing. Okay. But I actually view it more as the storytelling aspect, because that is the richness. That is the voice. That is the way in which she chooses to write. So maybe storytelling for me is actually the creativity, the individuality, the direct choices a particular author makes in which to tell their story, tell the story that they're doing. So for me, when I distinguish between storytelling and writing, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And the thing is, from that moment at that lunch, I decided, okay, this is something that writers are not understanding. That if someone is selling, then maybe you should figure out what about their stuff, since they are overly dramatic, since they're about sparkly vampires, which people tend to want to laugh at. What was it about these books, though, that made, and yes, most of them were teenage girls, but that was the target audience.
Yep.
Bella herself was a teenage girl.
Yep.
But again, Stephanie Meyer made bank. So it's worth it. And in fact, I don't even know how much later it was. It could have been months. It, could have been a year later. I did hear back from my friend from that lunch, and she said, I read it. I get it. So that was an interesting conversation that just, again, I used to talk to writers groups about this type of thing, because when I started editing, I discovered you can be a clean writer, technically good, get your grammar, get the sentence structure, get all of the minute details of that, and not hit your mark. Whereas you could be lacking in the grammar and the structure and those sorts of things. But if you have that storytelling voice, that way of drawing the reader in, you are going to be successful. So you can be a good storyteller without being a good writer, but it's not necessarily true the opposite direction. You can't necessarily be a good writer just by being a good writer without that great storytelling voice.
Yeah. So it sounds a little bit too like, to me, I look at it this way. Storytelling is the art where writing is the science.
Yes. Oh,
right.
Perfect. It's the creativity. It is the imagination. It is the ability for Stephanie Meyer to sit there and go, do you know what would be so dramatic at this moment after Edward walks away? Sorry, spoilers. If you haven't read it, it's too late.
That's on you.
But those months page after page, I remember reading it and thinking, oh my God, when is this going to end? But then in turn, I thought to myself, oh my God, my months were February, March, April, and then May I woke up, because it's the piece of writing that the reader can relate to, can feel.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's the
Yep.
emotion, it's the rawness, it's
Yes.
it's the personality.
Yep. Yep.
I like it.
So if
I
you're going
like
to develop one,
Mhm.
develop your storytelling. Focus on storytelling workshops, seminars. Focus on storytelling aspect, because the writing can be fixed. The writing can be fixed by a really great copy editor. The writing can be fixed by your next door neighbor who is an English high school English teacher,
Mm.
someone who in your family who is really good at grammar. Those things can be fixed. It's the storytelling that can't be missed, because if you
Sure.
miss the storytelling, you may get the Pulitzer Prize for your novel, but it might not be a bestseller.
Sure.
So it depends on what you're looking for. If you're just looking for the awards and the accolades that way, focus on the writing. If you want to make a career out of writing, then work on your storytelling voice.
Excellent. And we've touched a little bit on this. I think we've sort of like dabbed on it as we went through.
Yes.
But let's draw it out a little bit more. So
Yeah.
how does the art of storytelling itself influence the process of actually putting pen to paper, of writing?
Well, I think storytelling takes much more, again, leaning on that creativity, on the story itself, on the characters. So when I work with my clients, I always tell them, start with the characters, build the characters, because then the characters will influence where the story is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to influence what kind of conflicts are going to come up for the characters.
Sure.
Because you're certainly not going to create a character that is afraid of heights, that is going to go rock climbing with no problem.
Right.
The character itself is going to influence what happens in the story. And that, again, comes from that creativity and the storytelling aspect of it, and not necessarily writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to me too, it stands to reason that if you're thinking about the process, or that art rather, of storytelling, and then the process of writing, right? Like, you have to think about, in that story, why do we care? Like, why?
Yeah.
What's the point, right? Like, what's the whole point of this? Why are we telling this story? What are we trying to get across? Like, we have to be able to dig into that a little bit in the story. And if we can't say it, we can't write it.
Yeah. And that is actually the creativity within the storytelling, is bringing in that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring in emotion in writing? And it's not saying she felt sad.
Mm-hmm.
It is showing her feeling sad. It is describing her face with the one tear coming down with a certain look. That's what it comes down to. Those are storytelling tools versus writing tools.
Sure.
The show versus tell.
Mm-hmm.
A tell is always going to be boring. Now, you do want the balance of the two, because you can't always just show and then it gets too flowery, and then you're writing 5 pages of the color of a flower that, is growing in the wild.
Yep.
And that can be also boring.
Yeah, absolutely.
For 5 pages.
It's like drudgery at that point, because you're just like, oh my God, just tell me it's a big green hill. Like, I don't need to hear about all the shades of green. And
this is where a good editor that is going to cut some stuff for you might come in handy.
But I think a distinction to make right there too, just to touch on that, right? And again, the process of writing, you talked about a copy editor versus an editor, right? Yeah. Like somebody who, and they can be one and the same, but they might also be two distinctly different people.
Okay. So my rule of thumb is you should always have at least 3 eyes on the manuscript before you publish, or before you send it to New York, maybe to get published by New York. So you ideally You've gone over it, you've written it, you've maybe taken a second look at it, fixed some things. Then you hand it over to either what is called a developmental editor or a content editor.
Okay.
That type of editor is actually going to look more at the bigger picture, the umbrella, the flow, the pacing, the characters themselves, the story. Are there plot holes? What's missing? What needs to be added? What doesn't work? The bigger picture items. Then for me, I actually do 2 drafts with my clients. That's the first draft is the really big picture. And then the second draft, we get more into the details that either they fixed or maybe something from the first draft that wasn't quite fixed. Then my job is done. Because if I look at that manuscript anymore for details like grammar, I'm going to miss everything. I've seen it too much. They've seen it too much.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it needs to go to that third set of eyes, either after the second or third draft, depending on how many you want to do. Some people even do 4 or 5 drafts before they send it off to the copy editor. Copy editor or a line editor, those to me are the last person to see the manuscript to fix the grammar details that maybe you missed because you were concentrating on other things, the characters, the plot, the overall story. So yeah, that's kind of my process. That's what I suggest for people. I do know one of my favorite authors. I heard from her that she has no less than 3 editors. I even said, well, my gosh, what do all 3 editors do? And her way of thinking is she has one that sees it right after she's written it, the raw stage, someone who really can work with it and give her some good feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Then she has someone else look at it next, and then more copy editing on down the road. So she actually has like 5 eyes that see it before she publishes. And she's hybrid, so she does indie and traditional publishing. So she'll still have, now, I don't know for positive if she still has those same people look at it before she sends it to New York.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were a writer and that were my process, I'd still do that before New York. And in fact, before I went out on my own while still working for Borders, I did have some authors come to me and ask me if I would edit because their particular editor in New York doesn't really dig into that process. And I think that's the standard for New York. I don't think that they really dig into the content, the developmental editing.
Mm-hmm.
They do the copy editing. There are copy editors in New York, period. That's there. Their editors that are in office tend to be the advocate for the book. So they're the one in the marketing meetings, the cover art meetings, the placement meetings with retailers and those sorts of things. And those are very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And there just isn't enough time for that editor to also be digging in like they did back in the day with Harper Lee. They would sit down and actually talk with their editor and work on the manuscript and do things like that. Today's editor just doesn't have time for that. But you actually do really need someone to be your advocate at the publisher, and that's who the editor is. I would love to get some New York editors on here, so I'll probably put a call out to some of them that I know and ask them if they'd come on and talk about their process and stuff. Because I really don't know for certain if some of them do get in there. On the other hand, from some authors that I've spoken to, some of them have actually had their editor rewrite some stuff that they didn't think they did well. And that to me was like, oh my gosh.
Oh no.
Hope I'm not telling any state secrets, but that's why you really do have to be careful if you do publish with New York, that's really what you want to do. And you got to be smart about it and have an agent. And sometimes getting the agent after they've requested your material is probably easier than trying to get an agent and then selling to New York. But that's another podcast. Let's not get too far into that with our storytelling versus writing.
There you go. So, and again, too, I think this one we've touched on a little bit, but just to call it out, can someone be a skilled writer without being a good storyteller? And I think you kind of said,
No, okay. There's going to be the one in a million person who's a very good writer no.
yeah,
No, when I think about it, if you do not have storytelling, if you do not have that element of the story that sucks us readers in,
yeah,
then I'm just reading the newspaper.
right.
And
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
sometimes there's nonfiction in newspaper articles. Sometimes when I read articles out of the Atlantic, some of those writers are magical story weavers,
hmm
and that's news items. But then, I mean, you can think of really dryly written nonfiction news and that sort of thing. But I can also think of people like John Krakauer or Sebastian Junger or Glennon Doyle, who are wonderful, wonderful nonfiction writers.
hmm
So I'm trying to think
but still
of,
storytelling. It seems like, right? Like I
yeah.
feel
Oh,
like
it
we still have,
is.
yeah, because you can't.
It absolutely is. God, I'm going to get the title wrong. The Devil in the White City. And I can't remember who the author is right now, but about the World's Fair in Chicago and the murder house and all of that. I mean, it reads like a novel. It reads like a Jack the Ripper novel. So, I mean, it's just fantastic. Now
Eric
that's a
Larson.
storyteller. Eric Larson,
Eric
yes.
Larson.
How
Yeah.
could I forget Eric Larson?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, if you haven't read it.
I have not. I'll have to. I'll
Oh,
have to.
yes.
But I
Don't read it. Don't read it in the dark in your bedroom at night. And it's storming outside. And yeah, no, it's
yeah.
great. Great.
Yeah. No, and
Fabulous.
I think my 2 cents on this one, yeah, I think if you don't have that ability to tell a story or to weave a tale or to breathe life into it, you're drawing symbols on a paper bag. Like that's it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just
And if you think about like back in when I was still working for Borders and would go to writers' conferences and they'd have editors and agents and people would be doing pitch sessions. Aspiring writers would be doing pitch sessions with them. Part of that had to be those editors, those agents listening for that storytelling ability. Like, here's the story that I'd like to tell. And they tell it in like 5 sentences, 3-minute elevator pitch. And however that was conveyed. That's why I do say storytelling is not just writing novels and nonfiction, but it is TV, movies, music, auditory. TED Talks can be really great storytelling. A really good Oprah interview is good storytelling. A good Brene Brown, her Netflix series, or even there's some YouTube videos.
mhm.
Her TED Talk, of course, that made her famous. But one of my favorite ones is, gosh, what's it called? Something 99. It's a creativity feature that they asked her to come and speak, and she is hilarious when she's talking about it. But she's basically talking about the courage to be creative and Teddy Roosevelt's speech about not allowing the critics in.
Sure.
If you're not in the arena, I'm not interested in your feedback is her thing. And that's the truth. Someone, in order to kind of let go and allow yourself to be a good storyteller,
Mhm.
is to actually put those critics aside and just say, what can I do without all the noise in my head, without those critics, without the idea of, oh, I've got to pitch this to an editor or an agent or put it up on self-publishing. What can I do in the intimacy of my office, my laptop, that would be just a great story?
Mhm.
And that's where everyone should be starting. That's where everyone should be starting, is without that critic. That's why I'm not one of those who like gives you an entire list
Mhm.
of books to read about writing. I actually have a bunch of nonfiction stuff that I say, do this, do that. And one of those is Brene Brown with her Gifts of Imperfection is one, that Creative 99 or whatever it is. I'll have to
Mhm.
find it and we'll post it on the website. That, yeah, it is allowing yourself the room without judgment, without anything holding you back.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the ones that are going to push the envelope and be great. And the thing is, readers will always tell you they want the same thing, more of this, more of this. And sometimes they'll say, well, we want something different, but then they get mad because you've done something different. And but what they really, really mean is actually they want the great storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
new way of telling the same old story. Let's go back to Stephanie Meyer. They want the vampires, but this time they don't want them to sparkle. They want them to do something else. What is the popular one right now? The TV show, What We Do in the Shadows. I've never watched it, but it's one of those that people are really beginning to talk about it. And it's just coming back, and like Funko Pop is now releasing all of the figurines. So it's got to be getting up there.
Lock and Key too.
Yeah. So it's the idea that you can go, okay, here's the story I'm going to tell, but how am I going to be different from other people?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to tell this differently? Or if there is a wholly unique story that you want to tell, that's what the world needs. Because if you notice right now, specifically with Hollywood, they are really going through books, going through video games, comic books. Where are the original screenplays?
Yeah.
Where are the original TV shows? Right now, they're redoing. Some of them are being done very, very well. Last of Us, Heartstopper, just to name a few. But where are the new stories?
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about techniques and things.
Okay.
So if you think about different techniques or elements that are unique to storytelling, writing, maybe they don't show up as much or at all in writing, right?
Yeah.
But they are there as a unique like technique or element in storytelling itself.
Well, let's go back to Stephanie Meyer again and those one word, the month, on the page, on a blank page. So what ways can you use those kinds of techniques? James Fry, controversial, wrote the book A Million Little Pieces that was later outed as fiction. Had he just presented it at fiction, I think it still would have done just as well.
Oh, yeah.
But, he wrote that in like just a conscious thought, almost no sentence structure. But when you think in terms of the addicted mind, he was an addict, or the person who wrote it, the fictional character who wrote it, whatever.
Right.
Was an addicted mind, and that's how that was conveyed. So your best tool for storytelling is to actually figure out what is going to convey that character, that emotion, that whatever it is that you're trying to convey. With Stephanie Meyer, it was the depth of Bella's heartbreak and how many months it took her to take over. James Fry was the idea that this addicted mind had no structure to it. It was just random thoughts. Again, where can you take that with what it is that you're doing? So again, when you're sitting down with those characters, that's the place and time to figure out, oh, James Fry, this would be a really great way to tell an addict story. It's hard to say specific tools because the sky's the limit. No, I take that back. There is no limit. There's no limit.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want as long as it makes sense.
And serves the story.
The reader has, and it serves the story.
Yep.
It does have to make sense to the reader. And part of the reason why we have grammar and structure to sentences is because that's how we communicate. That's how people are understood. That's how we know who is speaking if there is no said.
Sure.
You can't have a million he said, she said, they said.
Yep.
You've got to vary it. You've got to pull it out and sometimes just know who's talking, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's a good challenge is to do this. You think about two people in your life that have recently told you a story.
Yeah.
Everybody knows somebody who told you a story that you were like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? Like, I have no idea why they're even telling me this, but oh my gosh, they're all wrapped up in it, but I'm not. Like, I have no, I don't get it. Right. Like, and think about why that is. Why did that story not connect with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, how did they tell it? What was the content? Like, just throw all the bits and pieces in there and try to figure out, like, do like a post-mortem on it.
Yeah. Why
And
didn't
then
it work?
think of one that you've heard from somebody recently that you were just like eating out of the palm of their hand, like you wanted to know more, or like you were just as engaged as if you were sitting right there with them, experiencing that whole thing, right? Like, how did that happen to you? And just compare and contrast, like, what was different, what made it come to life for you.
Exactly. There is no harm in digging into something like the story I told at the beginning of this podcast. Had those students sought to look at something and say, okay, this is highly successful, but it's crap. What made it good?
From a technical standpoint.
From a tech, yeah. But in their mind, it was crap.
Sure.
And I can sit here as an editor and say, were there some things that I would have helped her with? Of course.
Yes.
So it's not that I think she's the greatest writer in the world. She is a fantastic storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. There is no debate, nothing. What your job as a writer is to figure out what made that part of her good.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you do actually have to read the books to understand that. You can't look at the movies and see what was done there because things are done creatively.
Yep.
We talk about that in some of our podcasts. So yeah, it's a matter of digging in and figuring things out.
I love it. Yeah. Well, perfect. Well, I think that brings us to a nice close.
Yes, it
don't
does.
you think? Like,
yeah,
I think we've covered that really, really well. And
yes,
love the insight, love the discussion about it.
Yes.
I think it's a fascinating topic.
Although at some point I'm thinking, am I that bad storyteller that Matt can't wait to get?
No,
I know. I know. It's a matter of you and I have known each other for so long. I can get into tangent.
That's okay. That's all right.
Just like I did tonight.
Good.
But I get geeky about writing and storytelling and that part of it.
Well, everybody listening is just as geeky about it, so it's all good. Yeah. We're here for a reason, right? And that reason is to learn.
Absolutely.
That's the fountain of information and knowledge and storytelling wisdom that is Christina.
Oh, stop.
Perfect. All right, my dear. Well,
yes.
That brings us to the close of another wonderful episode. Where can they find you if they want more of Christina?
You can find me online at bookmatchmaker.com or just email me, Christina at bookmatchmaker.com, or on Instagram. That's pretty much where I hang out. I am on the other social medias, but really not as much. So IG, find me at IG.
They just sort of exist.
They exist there. And every once in a while, I'll like go over there and go, oh, wow, I have some notifications.
Oh, yeah, I did that, didn't I?
What about you, my dear? Where can they find you?
Well, you can find all of the stuff you'd ever want to know about me at Kassem, at Kassem, CASSEM.omg.lol.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Well, another one in the bag, and we'll see you again next week, and we'll share some more nuggets and pearls of wisdom.
Yeah. Or even just email one of us and tell us what you want. What you want to know, questions, curiosities, dig in, try to stump us. Find us something that we will have to dig for some answers. That would be fun.
That's perfect. There you go. You heard it here first. All right, friends. Well, again, this is time for us to say goodbye. So, bye. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working? What's not working? And what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.